to episode 5 of Jeff and Heather's Dahlia Diary. It's early April, and in this episode we're going to show you how we divide our tubers and then pot them up.
Hi everyone, before I head off into the greenhouse, I want to show you a couple of the exciting jobs that I've had to do since the last episode. Firstly, I washed the plant pots that the pot tubers had overwintered in. This will remove any bugs and viruses in there, and make them, because they're cleaner, it'll make them a lot pleasanter to use later on in the summer when I use them again. Next job was to cover the greenhouse with cool glass, which helps protect the small plants from any scorching by the sun. Finally, last summer I took some seeds off my own dahlias and I started them off in a seed tray. To be honest, I'm not all that confident because last autumn was very wet, and so I don't think they're of greatest quality, but we'll see. I'll keep you in touch. Now, before I start showing you how I divide my tubers up, I want to talk to you a little bit about planning. Those of you who've watched previous videos on our Dahliaholic channel will have seen that I like to grow dahlias where I get the tall ones at the back, the short ones at the front, etc. That doesn't happen by chance, it involves quite a bit of forethought. And I couldn't do any of this without using my Excel spreadsheet that I keep up to date. At the end of each season I make a record of all the dahlias that have grown, what colour they are, what type, how high they've grown, because that's an important part of the planning process, and finally how many I would ideally like to grow the following year. If I lose any varieties over winter, then they get deleted from the spreadsheet, and if I get new ones by buying new varieties or swapping some with friends, then they get added. Having grown dahlias in this garden for a number of years now, I know that 350 is the maximum I'm ever going to be able to fit into this garden. So with my spreadsheet, I always make sure that the number adds up to 350 at the end. I'll be referring to this spreadsheet quite a lot when I get in the greenhouse dividing the tubers up. So here I am, plan in hand, ready to get started. While it got down to 3 degrees in here last night, it's now over 30 degrees, so I think even Heather will be prepared to come and help out. Now, as you can see, the dahlias are already shooting quite well. I think most of them will have developed a decent eye by now. The warm weather will have brought them on, and the extra moisture I've given from watering can will have stimulated most of them into growth. I'm going to start with the letter A's. So this is the first dahlia I've taken out of storage. As you can see, it's quite a big thing. Now in theory I could put it into one pot like this. I'd have to chop a bit off, but it would more or less go in there. But the trouble with a pot that size, it would fill the greenhouse very quickly. So I'm going to do my best to chop this up into separate portions, and in theory I should probably be able to get 3 or 4 tubers at least out of this, 3 or 4 separate plants. See, if you look carefully, there are 6 shoots on here, and therefore you could eventually have 6 separate stems with their own branches and their own flowers on. In the past I've let my dahlias grow au naturel just like that, but found out at the end of the season I then needed to get a hammer and chisel to divide the tubers up. So for larger flowering varieties I tend to only allow a single stem, whereas for smaller, shorter plants I might allow 1 or 2 shoots, 1 or 2 stems, but no more than that. Well, I've managed to divide that tuber up into 5 separate plants. How did he do that, I hear you say? Well, I'll show you. So let's start with this variety called Amy K, one of my favourites. Now you can see that there are 1, 2, 3 shoots at least on separate parts of the whole tuber, so I should be able to get at least 3 plants out of this. Now the aim is to have 1 shoot attached to 1 tuber. That's all it actually needs to survive, because all the nutrients in that tuber will go into that bud. That one won't make any difference whatsoever to that bud. There's only that one that it's going to live on. So I will use my bonsai scissors to try to chop off that particular part of the tuber. Those of you who watched the video in February will remember that I broke my wrist in late January, so I'm not finding this all that easy, but I will persevere for art's sake. So there we are, we've actually got 2 tubers there with 2 shoots on, so I can now do the second one. So there we are, we've got 2 separate tubers with separate shoots on. They will make 2 separate plants. They've got good roots on already, so all I need now is to pot them up. Now there's a shoot there, and it's obviously attached to one of these 2 tubers. Which one is it? Well, that one's floating around in no man's land. It's broken. It's not going to be that one, and you can see it's already rotting. So that shoot is actually attached to that tuber. You can see that the neck continues down from the shoot into the tuber. So I will now try to take that one off and have another plant. Now I know this looks a bit brutal, but I'm hoping that it's one way of chopping this tuber up. So there you are, I've now got it intact on its own, and this will progress quite nicely. And still they come. There's a shoot attached to that tuber, and there's a shoot attached to that tuber. Several shoots actually. I'll now remove all this grot at the back because it only needs that bit, it doesn't need all that. So there we are, out of that one dahlia tuber we've got 5 separate plants to grow now, and the rest goes on the compost heap. So I now come to potting them up. I choose a pot that's just a little bit bigger than the tuber. It's tempting to get a very large pot and fill it with lots of compost, but ultimately they're only going to be in here for 4 to 5 weeks before I plant them out. The roots aren't going to become that long, and so you would just be wasting a lot of compost and a lot of space in the greenhouse if I chose larger pots. Potting compost, I'm just using any run-of-the-mill proprietary potting compost, as long as it's got a bit of nutrient in it to keep them going for a few weeks. In fact, this is the same compost that I stored the tubers in over winter. And I wet it so it's just damp enough so it sticks to the hand without being wet to waterlog them. So there we are, 5 separate plants in 5 separate pots, all with the shoot just showing above soil level. Now you might say to yourself, that's got more than one shoot. In fact, there are probably 2 or 3 there. Later in the season, it's a possibility that when all 3 have grown, I might chop one off and 1 or 2 of them off and turn them into pot tubers. I'll be showing you how to do that in the next episode. Last time I showed you how I grew pot tubers, and I've got a pot tuber of Amy Kay. And there it is. It looks pretty puny, but it will grow a flower this year. There's only the one little tuber, so what I will do, I will remove the weakest shoot and then pot it up. And there it is in a very small pot. Now my plan says that I only want to grow 4 Amy Kays, What I'll do, I will store 5 of them in the greenhouse and there's 1 surplus. If I keep 5, then if there's any rot, I will still definitely get my 4. Now sometimes, folks, it's hard to decide what to do, and sometimes I just have to be brutal. I can see there's a shoot there and there are shoots there. If I divide it down the middle, I'm not going to hurt them, but more shoots will probably be exposed once I've done this. Well, there you go. I've certainly not done it any harm, and this might make the job easier. Now if I squeeze it and divide them again, there you are, 2 plants. Shoot there, shoot there. Now this might look a bit brutal, but again, a shoot on that, shoots on that. Ultimately, folks, it depends how precious the variety is to me. If I've got plenty of something, I'm prepared to take more risks. Now this one is a variety called Blackjack. It often produces very large tubers. Now as you can see, roots are already appearing out the side of this tuber, and so realistically all the portion below this level is not really needed, because that shoot will get enough nutrients from that half of the tuber, and it's only going to take up a very large plant pot and a lot more compost, so I'm going to chop it. So there it is, chopped in half, roots still attached to that part of the tuber, and that will grow nicely. I'll get it potted up now. So there it is, ready to flourish. In the last episode I told you how some dahlias like to get off to an early start in the morning. Crayfield Edna is one of them. But on the other hand, Cynthia Houston is one of those that likes to stay in bed. It was obviously named after a lady. Whether she was a late riser, I'm not sure. Even with a magnifying glass, I can't see much sign of life yet. One of the top growers advised me to try putting dahlias like that into hot water for a couple of minutes to stun them into growth. Now I'm not sure that I'm ready to do that just yet. I'll give it another couple of weeks to see how it goes. Now I suppose at this stage I ought to talk about plant diseases and hygiene. Like all the plants, dahlias do suffer from diseases and viruses particularly. Now there's no doubt that dahlia viruses can be a problem. You can tell when you've got a virus because the plants don't develop right. The leaves are withered, they get stripes on them, and they don't grow as tall as they ought to do. In the main, it's thought that viruses are spread by aphids passing the disease from one plant to another, but it's supposed to be possible to transmit it yourself by the implements that you use when you're dividing them. So when I first started growing dahlias, I used to wash my scissors and knives in between each plant using a mixture of soap and disinfectant. But to be honest, washing implements between every dahlia, it's time consuming. It takes long enough, this job anyway, so I've stopped doing it. I work on the basis that most of the dahlias are dividing. I grew last year. They didn't have a virus last year, so why should they have it now? But if I get a dahlia from somebody else, I make sure I only grow 1 plant of it to make sure it's okay in its first year. And the other thing I've learned to do is to be ruthless. If there's any sign of a virus in a plant, I immediately dig it up and put it in the bin. I always keep a few spares at the start of the season to put in just in case that happens. If I do come across a case of dahlia virus in the coming few months, I'll definitely show it to you before I throw it away. By the way, I'm chuffed to say that I managed to divide that dahlia into 5 separate pieces. So I think that's about it for this episode. I've completed all the A's, the B's and the C's. But as you can see, there is still plenty to go at. The next episode will be in a couple of weeks' time, by which time I hope to be able to show you how to take cuttings and do pot tubers. It's 10 days since I planted the dahlia seeds, so I thought I'd just check and have a look. Wow, 10 days on and they're all dead. They're all rotten. Told you I didn't think they were up to much. Never mind. Try again next year.
Can I have a go?
Yeah. Oh, not with that!
Just joking.